I want to thank the Central Committee for reaching out and asking me to make this presentation tonight. Quote, "Freedom is a light for which many men have died in darkness." This is inscribed on the tomb of the unknown Revolutionary War soldier in Philadelphia, where our Constitution and Declaration of Independence were born. A plaque on the tomb reads, "Beneath this stone rests a soldier of Washington's army who died to give you liberty." Nearly 1.4 million troops died to found this country and protect our liberty since then. When we address the Constitution, interpreting it, applying it, or altering it, that has to have the absolute highest position of honor, respect, and knowledge, period. We're not amending a speed limit, we're not changing a state law. What is the Article 5 Convention? Briefly, Article 5 of the, and I'm sure my partner up here will have his perspective. It's pretty straightforward. Article 5 of the Constitution. The founders inserted that. There are two ways. The traditional way to amend the Constitution, what we're going to discuss tonight, is a second way that has not yet been used, where if tyranny reached out across the land, like it does now, there's a provision where state legislatures can rise up, challenge the federal government. Congress has to call upon certain standards a convention to amend the Constitution. Why is this dangerous? The Constitutional Convention of 1787 absolutely was a runaway convention. What does that mean? Of the 12 states that sent delegates to the 1787 convention, only 2 of them placed no restrictions on the power of their delegates. The other 10 states, Congress, and Article 13 of the Articles of Confederation, all gave very specific restrictions for the rules of this convention, yet they were not honored. New York and Massachusetts and Congress specifically restricted delegates to revising the Articles of Confederation. Massachusetts and Delaware sent delegates that were to protect the rights of states to veto constitutional changes and recall their congressmen. New Hampshire, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina, Georgia, and again, Article 13 of the, in effect at the time, Articles of Confederation, required all 13 states to ratify any changes. All of these were violated. After Congress was presented the draft Constitution on the 26th and 27th of September in 1787, Congress debated whether or not to censure the delegates from the Constitutional Convention for exceeding their authority by creating a new form of government instead of simply revising the Articles of Confederation. Threats like this can happen again because of the far leftist organizations that are sitting out there and waiting for the dedicated conservatives to call this convention. Why is the Convention of States absolutely not the group to have anything to do with this movement? For the Convention of States material and their approach to work, they have to be 100% right all of the time in everything they say in their material to mitigate any risk to our Constitution. If that was the fact, I would consider joining with their movement. For those of us that are opposed, all we have to do is be right with 1 or 2 points to the legitimate potential threats to the Constitution, and it would tell you don't need to go there. And in referencing what I said before, September 24th of this year at 1:09 p.m. in the afternoon, Mark Meckler, the leader of the Convention of States movement in Reno, said, quote, "No convention delegate has ever exceeded their charter." The record of the convention documents by James Madison documents that's absolutely not the case. This is not the gentleman or the organization to wheel our Constitution into the operating room to perform surgery on it. COS endorsements are highly questionable. Limbaugh, Hannity, Beck sell endorsements to conservative groups. And in fairness, while I could not find any documentation that either concludes or even hints at payments to those folks in related to the Convention of States, I still have to question. However, a recent endorsement that the Convention of States got from the Texas Public Policy Foundation comes after a documented fact that they received $124,000 from the Convention of States. They use the logical fallacy of, quote, argument from authority. You say these names, we bow over, wow, we watch Fox News, we love this stuff, these guys must know what they're talking about. I don't know if that's the case. Also, recently in Reno, Mr. Meckler was asked, how does your organization get funding at the very end? And somebody said, you don't have to answer that. And he actually, I respect him, turned around and answered that. But he didn't answer it completely honestly. He said, it's from small donations across the web from people. Well, then how come the Sam Adams Alliance gave $625,975 according to IRS filings? And there's more of them I won't bore you with. I'll provide them later if you need them. According to the Congressional Research Service report of April 11, 2014, Congress will control the call to the convention. They will control the allotment of delegates, procedures, time, dates, places like that. And in fact, Congress has proposed, they were not passed, 41 bills where Congress asserted their right under the necessary and proper clause relating to Article 5 that they would define the convention. Now, let me skip ahead a little bit. Here, those of you that saw what our Nevada delegation did in 2012 in Tampa,
Yeah.
what those people said, whether they believe their binding was legal or not is a question some of them still have. God bless them, that's their business. But they promised the people of Nevada they would vote a certain way. They got in there, they broke that. I was the chairman of the resolutions subcommittee of our 2012 and 2014 state Republican conventions. And I can tell you, the phone calls you get before, the lawyers from the presidential campaigns that were in my committee, and one of them was honest. I said, why are you here? He says, to make sure this goes the way it's supposed to go. You don't think that's going to happen, a little piddle state to them like Nevada, on a national level, on a constitutional convention? In this area, I'll sum it up by saying, America was founded, you don't have to say a Christian nation, that's fine, but with Christian values. We can't argue that point. Judeo-Christian values. Today, the people in our country are all about what color I am, what sex I am, what church I go to, what state I'm a member of, and all these things. They're not about what's best for our country. It's about what can I get the best for my organization. How can you tell me those influences won't reach to a convention? And even Mr. Nadelson, the constitutional attorney that they reference in the vast majority of their material, concludes in videos on YouTube that this will potentially go to litigation. So let me get this straight. Our Congress is out of control. This Constitution's out of control because of an activist court, the Supreme Court, but yet you want to introduce states suing states over representation. You want to introduce the federal government suing states. You want to introduce Americans for Prosperity suing convention of states, and all these things, 5 years of federal litigation that will ultimately land in that same Supreme Court. And here's how it's going to go. They're going to say a valid call to a convention was made, a convention is going to happen, and here's how it's going to go. I don't think we want that. There's an alternative, folks. It's called Guard the Constitution Project. Something that I just put together the other day with some folks where we are going to gather together like-minded people. We are going to create a nationwide email alert list. We're going to analyze legislation, and we're going to apply activism that has worked in the past. During Q&A, I'll be happy to prove to you and tell you how it's worked. Liberty comes with a price. That price is eternal vigilance. You need to not believe what we say tonight. You need to take what we tell you and please do your own homework. Start by not believing what I say. Try to disprove me and find your own answers, please. Thank you.
Already? Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming tonight. Thank the Carson City Central Committee for inviting us. And I want to thank Sean Meehan. I've not met Sean before until tonight, but I understand he's going to be willing to educate us and share with us what he sees as a strong alternative to the COS approach and how his vision and approach will bring back our constitutional protections and way of life. My name is Tim Duvall. I am a Convention of States Chief Strategist for grassroots development here in Nevada. I don't get paid. That's the nature of grassroots. I was promoted from a legislative liaison to this position and didn't know what I got, if I got double pay or not. Simply stated, the Convention of States project seeks to limit the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government. Its objective is to exercise one of the constitutional tools that our founders put into place as part of the checks and balances of power when they designed our constitutional republic. This effort is not a call for a constitutional convention or a CONCOM. Claims of this could be no further from the truth, and that the Constitution does not authorize a constitutional convention. But instead, the Constitution morally compels and gives power to the legislatures of the states to exercise their duties under Article 5 to amend the Constitution, to propose amendments to the Constitution in order that government may be better able to represent the people. Article 5 and the legislators by themselves cannot amend the Constitution in that convention. They can only propose amendments to the Constitution, which then need to be ratified by 4/5 of the states. Nevadans should convince state legislatures to be part of calling for this convention. A 53-year-old John Adams in 1788 counted 8 explicit balancing mechanisms in the new Constitution of the United States. He proclaimed them as evidence of the Constitution's Republican virtue. These instances of government branches checking one another were as follows. First check was that the states would check the power of the national government. The second was the House would check the power of the Senate. The third was that the President would check the power of the Congress. The fourth was courts would check the power of the Congress and the President. The fifth was that the Senate would check the President when it came in regard to appointments and treaties. The sixth protection was that the people would check their representatives. The seventh at the time was that state legislatures would check the Senate because they were the ones who selected the Senate. And the eighth was the Electoral College would check the power of the people. Today we can look back on this list of balances and see that most no longer apply. I've watched the last 10 years accelerate the power shift from the states to the federal government. The accumulation of agency regulations, instituted and developed by career bureaucrats who often disregard the law, are supported by misguided court decisions and have resulted in virtually every one of these protections being lost. America's call for meaningful solutions has gone unanswered. Our president this year proclaimed that I have a phone and I have a pen and I don't need Congress. Who would have thought that the legacy of Barack Obama would be the announcement of a post-constitutional America? This great document has been put by the wayside by Washington, D.C. In the wake of all that has happened, our central government has lost the trust of its citizens. It's gotten so bad that the Gallup organization in 2010, after tracking trust in the federal government, stopped doing that. They've been tracking it since 1953. Stopped asking this question: how much of the time do you think you can trust government and Washington to do what is right? The answer, 87% of people said only some of the time or never. But Nevada has not lost faith in state or local government. The recent results showed that 72% support local government a great deal and trust local government a great deal. What is clear is our country is at a crossroads. And a solution we seek cannot be some trickle-out approach to solving deep problems. Or can we rely on the very people who have brought us to this crisis to solve it for us? It truly is time for bold colors. Americans thirst for a change. They want to trust their government once more, and they can use the government they trust most to make those changes. They can use their state governments. Article 5 of the Constitution empowers state assembly members and senators in Nevada, in the state capitol, to rebalance that power. And while doing so, they're more accountable to you and I. They're our friends, our neighbors. They live in our cities, in our rural areas. These are the politicians that are truly accountable to we the people. And our founders knew that one day they may be called upon to right a central government gone astray. So in opening the discussion with you all, the Convention of States project is not about conservative or liberal ideology. This is about returning governance and restoring the rights of the people to be fairly represented by their government. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to open it up to questions. I sort of see one arm in the air, so David, go ahead.
If I could ask Jim first and then Sean to address this. Nevada is a small state, and if we call this convention, even if it comes from the legislature, how are we to prevent California, New York, and the other radical states from controlling the agenda and passing progressive messages and amendments instead of the more conservative messages and amendments that we would want?
The beauty of a state convention, state amendment convention, is that each state ends up with one vote. So each state can send as many delegates to that convention as they want. But they only get one vote, just like in ratifying an amendment. Let's say somebody proposes an amendment to the Constitution that we all don't like. Nevada gets one vote. California gets one vote. New York only gets one vote. That's why this approach is meaningful, because Nevada holds the same power as California or New York, and teamed up with other states that think the same as we do, gives smaller states the power. That's the beauty of the Electoral College. That's still why it still works. If we move to a popular vote, who would elect our president? You got a left coast and a right coast.
Well, Tim, that all sounds good, and I know that's what your literature says, and that's how we'd like to think this would happen. But the fact is, and this is again documented in the Congressional Research Service report, Congress in the past has already offered bills on this point. Under the necessary and proper clause, putting to work their duty under Article 5, they would apportion delegates according to the Electoral College, and Nevada would get squeezed out, and the scenario, I don't need to repeat it, sir, that you described would happen. If I'm wrong, the best case scenario that we can hope for is Congress in fact does believe that, and again, we take the lid off those several years of litigation when even my friends in the Convention of States movement rightly say America is in a precarious position and we need to act now. There are ways that we can act now that don't involve inviting a bunch of divisive litigation.
Right here.
I want to preface my question with a little bit of history. In 1789, when this document was hammered out, we were a different people. We were, I considered, to be honorable people. I had some scallywags in there, but they were in the minority. So what I'm saying is, these guys who formed the Constitution looked ahead and said, you know, we just got out from under tyranny. We should provide something in there just in case that other group goes haywire. Now, my question is this. Oh, by the way, I have a little point of order for you. It's 3/4 of the states, not 4/5.
All right, thank you.
If the only purpose of action provided by Article 5 is to propose amendments was to prevent either the Congress or the Convention amending Articles 1 through 4, which is the meat of that Constitution.
John, you go first this time?
Sure. Well, we have an unfortunate precedent for that, and that is our Constitutional Convention that we had. We had an Annapolis Convention, talked about trade and commerce. The states reached out to the federal government and said, you know, this isn't quite working. The federal government did not pass an authoritative call. They passed, and the word opinion is in the call to the Philadelphia Convention, that this would kind of be a good idea if you states got together and did this. So by the way, the original Constitutional Convention, for those of you that are parsing words and doing research, actually wasn't a constitutional convention. It was a convention of states. The states jointly and voluntarily came together and did that ultimately received the blessing of Congress. What they did is, under the Articles of Confederation that were our, in effect, Constitution at the time, there was Article 13 that required every single state to ratify any change. As some of you know now in our little pamphlets here, only 9 states were required to ratify. The Constitution became binding upon those 9 states by the ratification of New Hampshire, June 21st, 1788. On May 29th, 1780, Rhode Island became the 13th and final state to ratify, barely. By the way, they protested and never went to the convention. From June 21st to 1788 through May 29th, 1790, under the authority of Congress, the Continental Congress, which disbanded themselves and stood up the new country, for almost 2 years we operated under a constitution that was not properly ratified according to the Articles of Confederation. Great document, love it. I know you all love it. I'm glad we finally ratified it the right way. But initially it wasn't done.
Patrick, did you have a question?
Well, I think he has the answer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hey, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Let's move forward to 2011. Let's move forward to the decision handed down by the Supreme Court that said I could no longer choose my health care, that you could no longer choose your health care. A decision that I just got a notice that my health care is going up 228% this year. Because I obviously, being in the medical business and the medical device business, have no idea how to buy health insurance. Well, my wife and I were very pleased. We do get pediatric dental care in this new plan. Well, I don't know if we can adopt our grandchild, but maybe that would work. I think we need to look at that. Where is the runaway convention? The runaway convention's in Washington, D.C. right now. They wanted to change amendments 1 through 4. They have the power to do that. But they didn't do it through a ratification or proposing an amendment. They've done it through the courts. They've done it in trickle down tyranny. If you trust Congress, keep going the way we are. Let me just make one point. They did have the opportunity to vote on a balanced budget amendment. Last vote was November 2011. Vote failed by 27 votes in the House. Didn't make it to the Senate.
Thank you.
Good rebuttal.
No, we're not going to
It's not a
debate.
debate.
Thank
It's
you.
a town hall.
Patrick, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts. Based on your own statement, you said you're going to depend upon the constitutional amendment based on the assemblyman of each state. I mean, I'm getting my things mixed up. But since we have a Democratic assembly in Nevada, am I wrong about that? It was majority Democratic, and there's a lot of Democratic states. We're going to depend upon the liberal democratic thinkings to go to these constitutional amendments, correct?
The legislatures call for the convention. The delegates are then selected by the state. Just like the call for the ratification of the repeal of prohibition, which was the first time Congress called for a convention ratification movement, the state selected their delegates and voted on their delegates, and each one of those delegates did the work that they were asked to do. But we do have precedents of where they follow the
But
course.
I'm saying that in our state, most of the delegates going would be Democratic.
It's not necessarily the presidents for a call to convention would be the elect. It depends on what the state decides and how they want to elect their delegates. So it is up to the state. It really is up to the state to elect their delegates. But there are 26 Republican-controlled states in the country. So, you know, last time I counted, that means there's only 24 Democrat-controlled.
A follow-up
So, you know.
a follow-up question to that would be, in my mind, getting my wires straight here. There must be a go for the democratic, for this conventional purpose. In other words, you want to change something in the Constitution. So give me an idea of the type of things you want to change in the Constitution.
Let me give you one go that's supported by 74% of Americans right now. That's term limits. And that has not changed for almost 20 years. The last vote on term limits was in 1995. Gee, I wonder what the vote was. Let's see. 227 said yes. Well, it failed by 57 votes. If you're asking Congress, and most of those congressmen have been there for more than 3 to 4 terms, to say, I guess I'm going home next year. So you're right.
To respect the gentleman and answer his question, would you mind restating your first question, sir?
Okay.
If anybody wants to help him.
That the representatives of each state assembly who would have to call for the resolutions for the Congress congressional resolution would be coming from Democratic states, Republican states, and since our assembly is mostly Democrat, I would assume the liberal Democratic thinking from our assembly would be convention.
Okay, I'll take a swing at it. Actually, I think that whether we're a Democrat or Republican legislature, as far as the call, probably would be of little significance in the bigger picture. The thing you would want to look at would be what would be the substance of the resolution they're passing specific to the subject. Now, I also have to correct Tim. He brought up the 18th Amendment and did some of my dirty work for me here. In fact, and this is, you can find this under Hawk v. Smith. It's a 1920 Supreme Court ruling regarding the 18th Amendment that said you couldn't drink if you wanted to, like a responsible adult, right? Prohibition. No, and that was to find out that Ohio actually held a referendum in their state to decide whether or not they would pass this amendment. Well, the court case was to say that that's illegal. Your legislature decides to pass a constitutional amendment or not. However, the vote was very instructive. They did not want it passed. It passed almost overwhelmingly in their legislature, and this is in the early 1900s. So our legislators that are our friends and neighbors and that we're accountable to use Tim's words, in Nevada that tends to be more true than where some of us come from in California, where they're not our friends and neighbors, we don't see them and they don't care, and their strings are pulled by money. So it is absolutely not the fact, and I'm not saying this would be a repeat, we don't know what will happen, and that's the scary part. But we have a precedent that we have a state legislature in Ohio that passed a constitutional amendment against the recorded vote and will of their people. It can happen, folks. Term limits, I'll be completely honest with you, I am mixed on that. People say you can never pass that in Congress is the argument. Nevada has term limits. Our legislators passed that. Don't say never. Currently, it's sitting in committee in Congress. They're
Juanita, and I'll go to Kate.
Can I make a background? First of all, I was not talking about passing of the 18th Amendment. I was talking about passing of the 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment. So the repeal was done by state conventions. Okay.
All right, Juanita, go ahead.
First, I gotta clarify a couple of things. The Reagan administration did pass a balanced budget amendment they have followed. Anyway, my question was, Robert's Rules of Order already has complete convention rules. And as we know, any convention delegate then can do anything they want. They do not have to follow the rules of Congress or whomever creates the golden rule. They can change those rules, as we've seen in many of our conventions. So why would we believe that there would be any difference in what we've already seen in our conventions and what we have in these conventions?
Will we have contention? Of course we will. This is going to be talking about financial responsibility. To find out. So it's defined in many ways. We're going to talk about term limits. It's pretty easy to define term limits. Does that mean 12 years or 24 years? What term is that? The key is that the discussion will take place. But remember, this convention doesn't ratify those amendments. So if you had somebody that somehow the repeal of the Second Amendment happened, you don't think there are 11 Democrat states that would vote against that right now? I think there are. I don't know too many states, including, believe it or not, California, would not ratify that amendment. So you got to look at, we still have to ratify amendments. So understand, this convention proposes amendments. So we would propose the amendment, sorry about that, but it doesn't create the amendment. It's only a proposal. Just like the right of 18-year-old to vote was proposed. Now, little correction, Ronald Reagan did not pass a balanced budget amendment. He called for a convention of states for passing the amendment, to propose an amendment, because he knew Congress wouldn't do it. And the vote in 32 states, fell 2 states short, called for a convention that year. So it fell 2 states short.
It's interesting that Juanita pointed out Robert's Rules of Order, because those of us that were paying attention also know that in the legislature in Nevada we use Mason's Rules of Order, and in the convention in Tampa we use the House of Representatives rules, which we promptly ignored under cries of division. We've got it on videotape, folks, and I mean, I'm a dedicated Republican, but I also am an American veteran and a patriot, and I have to believe in the truth. And my party makes mistakes. If you're not big enough to admit that, you ought to reconsider your role here. And the person with the gavel decides the outcome of a convention. That's a fact. Now, that may not always go that way, but that's a very real possibility. We've got it on tape that that's what happened. As far as the ratification, I just cited for you, and that's fine, the correction Tim made. I believe he was being honest when he said the 21st.
Right.
But still, what I talked about the 18th is true. A constitutional amendment was ratified in Ohio by their legislature against the will of the people. Now, here's an interesting thing that was pointed out to me by a friend who's very sharp on parliamentary type things. What's to say that in the rules of any state that you cannot have a quorum of a simple majority can do business, and that's all that shows up in several states, and you do business, and you have effectively a minority of the population or the minority of the representation passing and ratifying that bill. That's the kind of thing that can happen.
Kate?
Thank you. You know, the Constitution already has limits. It's already provided limits in the part. And as a matter of fact, the Supreme Court is actually told the legislature. That is not happening. The legislature's not taking that power. They're not. So if we're not already enforcing the limits that are already there, why would we not allow usurping amendments as well? Yeah, why would we pay attention? Why would anybody pay attention to the amendments if we're not paying attention to the Constitution?
they'd have to reinterpret those amendments, and it took a long time to get to where we are. So the Supreme Court has been reinterpreting the Constitution for over 200 years. So it's taken a long time to get there. So will there be a need for correction in another 50 years? Possible. And that's one reason the founders put this provision in Article 5. We're ready to go and ratify the Constitution. George Mason proposed this, said the only body that would be able to amend the Constitution would be the federal government through the Congress. He said, you know what, maybe we can't trust them. We just got done fighting a war against tyranny. What if it happens again? So he put that out for the states to have that power. But will they reinterpret some of those amendments? That could happen. It's happening now. It's happened for a long time. And, you know, I gotta tell you, just on a personal basis, when I can't choose my own health care program. Oops, sorry about that. Or when I support conservative causes and have letters from a big agency of the federal government coming to my door, I have to stand up and do something about it.
To the limits on federal power, I agree, you're correct. Our Constitution already contains everything that's needed. Almost every amendment that you could say to me that's been proposed by Convention of States and other organizations is already covered. You say balanced budget amendment, Article 1, Section 8, enumerated powers. Congress can only do those things and spend money on those things. That's a balanced budget amendment that's already in effect. And the only other thing I'd say to that is Thomas Jefferson said that whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, to the lady's question, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. That's also almost equally undefined in the case law. I will concede that. And some would say it's a rebel, it's a dangerous, it's a crazy thing. But a simple example is to use Tim's Obamacare, which I'm not a fan of either, is don't be one of the states and don't let your state legislature and your governor wrap their arms around Obamacare and set up an exchange at the speed of light. To not, in fact, the states that have not set up the Obamacare exchanges nullified Obamacare to the extent possible. Now, do you want to lock and load and start another revolution? I am not advocating that. I think we'll call that good. Okay.
Hi, my name is Jeannie Gizuru, and I'm the district captain for the Convention of State project in Douglas County, Assembly District 39. Sean, I wanted to ask you a question and do a little bit of clarifying. On the subject of the Nevada conventions, and Nevada's role in Tampa, etc., I recently went to Wikipedia, and I looked up political party conventions. And it basically said that for decades now, those have been viewed primarily ceremonial. Because of course, the political parties want to control the optics of it, the result of it. And so I was wondering, if in your opinion, if you can actually distinguish the difference between maybe a political party convention and an interstate convention, like the Colorado River Pact or the Transit Authority in the Northeast. Because when you say that the person in that convention with the gavel basically has all the rules, you are not making the fine difference between a political party convention and these interstate conventions. What do you think?
Jeannie, thank you for the question, and I agree that there are people out there that interpret it the way you do. But I would go back to my previous mention of the Speaker of the House, who was the acting chair of the convention in Tampa, who, in front of the cameras and everything like that, and cries for division of the House. And those of you that don't know, under parliamentary procedure, that means you must stop, divide the yeas and nays, and count them to be sure by hand. Division, 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 it's on the cameras. Boom, without objection, motion carried, laid on the table, boom, the freight train rolled on. Jeannie, there's effectively not much of a difference. There's a group of people that get together, they're elected legally, they're representatives to a function. Oh, and by the way, we haven't discussed yet the scary part that didn't even happen in Tampa. They did that in front of the cameras. Under parliamentary procedure, any of the parliamentarians in the room will tell you, we have a little thing that we can do called executive session. The 1787 convention did that. The only reason that we know what happened in the Constitutional Convention is James Madison broke the rules of the convention and took notes that his widow later sold to the government upon his death. And if they go down, and oh, by the way, when you go into executive session, the doors are locked, the cameras are off, the convention runs the show. The Mount Vernon draft rules are not the rules the convention decides are the rules. And some state legislators have told me they want to pass a law so that we can punish, fine, imprison, and recall our delegates. How can you recall delegates that you can't communicate with?
Let's talk, just one comment about Obamacare. You may not have a state exchange, but go try to buy the insurance policy you had last year. Yeah, it's not in existence. So I wish that were. I've asked my insurance company, hey, you know what? I'll take the fine, I'll take the hit. Just give me what I had last time. And that's not available. So there are ways to implement plans, and it's been implemented. Look at the impact. Walmart is going to cut their employees down to 30-hour weeks. You know how to make the number. You know how to do it. Don't have to insure them anymore. So a lot of companies are looking at it. So we have to be careful. Let's talk about a convention. We had a question of political convention versus a ratifying convention or versus a convention to propose amendments. It's two different animals. I've been to political conventions, and let the party go. Let the party begin. I mean, it really is. That's what it's about. It's an advertising campaign. It's a party. There are certain rules that are going to be followed, but it's not a serious convention that's going to propose amendments to the Constitution. That's what we're talking about.
Jim, in the back?
As we're talking about a convention of states, I keep going back to a plain reading of Article 5. And that plain reading says, the Congress, whenever 2/3 of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments. And then it goes on. It's very clear from that reading that the states' involvement in the convention ends when they tell Congress to call that convention for them. And from that point on, Congress is making the decisions, they're calling the convention. Many of us in this room have been involved in calling conventions, we know how it goes. And so I'm not sure the Convention of States is even an accurate description of what Article 5 allows us to do. I would be interested in hearing how that is incorrect.
The interpretation of Article 5 is that Congress must call a convention. They don't get to set the rules. They don't get to be at the convention. Unless their state says, Nevada says, Congressman Amadei, we want you at the convention. You can be one of our delegates. So the state legislature and Senate has to be both houses that call the convention. Or ask Congress or petition Congress to call a convention. So it's not Congress who's calling. Congress has to set a time and date where the convention takes place, but they're not invited to the party.
Sean.
Well, I in a minute will disagree with Tim, but let's say for a second, before I get to that, the important point isn't how I'm going to disagree or why, but the fact that learned and educated people with much more experience in constitutional law than us disagree. This can only, best case, result in many, many lawsuits as our country stares into the abyss. It's not the answer. Now, for those of you that are familiar with the Constitution, under Article 1, Section 8, the enumerated powers, the last clause, the necessary and proper clause, Congress is to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. I would submit to you that if Congress was simply supposed to be a secretary, that the Secretary of State would have been constitutionally given this duty. Congress simply does not have only a clerical role, and in fact, with 41 bills submitted in history, Congress has asserted that it absolutely is their purview to call, define the convention. Now, will they be there, won't they? Again, back to the 18th Amendment that we talked about. You know who the president of the convention was in Ohio for ratifying that convention? Their governor. So you can't say that these people that we have an issue with won't be at the table. Will Harry Reid be a delegate? Will Harry Reid be the president of the convention? Elected by a Democrat legislature in Nevada? Wow, what would happen there? Maybe they'll try to take God out of a couple laws. Oh wait, that was the Democrat convention, I'm sorry.
How about back here in the corner? You had a,
I think Doug was before me, so I'll let him go.
okay, go ahead.
I'm Doug Johnson. I'm Coalitions Director for the Convention of States in Nevada. And I'd like to ask both these gentlemen precisely what their plan forward is. I'd like Tim to explain how Convention of States wants to get this movement going across the country. And I'd like to ask Sean specifically how his plan would work if he doesn't want to use Article 5. Thank you.
One of the things I think it's important, we all have this little book called the Constitution of the United States. But if you were really to look at the interpretation of this law, I don't know if you would be able to put it all in this room. There are laws and there are interpretation of laws. You think that just Congress makes law? I work in the FDA regulated environment. I'm seeing new regulations now for the first time, once a month. I used to see them once a year, before that once every 3 years. Well, there are laws being made outside of Congress, and Congress has advocated that authority to those agencies. Where do we see this convention going? Are we going to get a perfect world? I don't think so. But the world we have today, the Constitution we have today, the ability to reach out into your life has never been so strong. Talk to young people today. Do they think they have an opportunity for the future? They're wondering, where is the future? Pretty soon we're going to see 2 employees supporting every retired person. Pretty obvious. The Democratic Party talked about math, talked about arithmetic. They forgot to read the trustee report for the Social Security Administration. Arithmetic's pretty clear in that report. If you don't like that one, try reading the Medicare one. Years get a little closer to us. So my vision is that we go to a convention, we discuss what's right. Will we get a perfect world? No. Do we have a perfect world right now? Far from it. And I think that that's our move. Well, do we expect everybody in this room, do I expect everybody in this room to jump up and down and not worry a little? No. By worrying is how you keep track of things. By paying attention is how you'll keep track of your government, how you'll keep track of what goes on. Right now, a lot of people quit paying attention.
I want to give Doug a note of respect because that question he asked has been the same question he's been asking me consistently, assertively, and respectfully. And I appreciate that because while I don't accept the argument that some Convention of States people make that, well, what's your answer? Again, that's the logical fallacy is, well, we don't want to take this sinking boat. We have to go on a boat ride. Where's your boat? How about we go have a hamburger and don't go on a boat ride until we figure out where the good boat is? This August, my sister came out with my little 10-year-old niece that I love to death. And I talked to her, what's your favorite subject in school? And she said, history. And I kind of started tearing up a little bit. She talked about veterans and things like that. And I said, what part of history? She said, the Civil War. I said, wow, Mommy told me you studied military history and the Civil War in school. And I said, well, you know, living in Charleston, South Carolina, y'all started it. And she laughed. She said, Uncle Sean, we actually learned that. We need to learn from history. And here's some history that works. And Doug, finally, my plan forward. A couple years back when I joined the Republican Party, I was sitting in a coffee shop talking to some people locally, and we had Senator Bill Raggio, who gave some good service to this state, but had forgotten what his party promised to his constituents was. What do we do? What do we do? To make this short and stay within my time, I was told, write a resolution. A lot of learning went into that. Robert's Rules, we wrote a resolution. 7 of our 17 counties passed a verbatim resolution, spent all night on the phone to our senators. Senator Raggio came into his office the next day, didn't see the freight train coming out of the tunnel, and found out he was not going to be the minority leader anymore. We, the people, reached out, united, and spoke. No disrespect to the man in the service he gave this state for the most part, but he'd forgotten the promise to his constituents. We took it back. Bigger scale. Several years ago when I was retiring from the Air Force, the U.S. flag was being flown over the Capitol. For my retirement, called the senator's office to check on it. What's going on? There's this thing about immigration. There's this thing about immigration. She said in the history of this country and the feedback they've recorded, phones are catching on fire, fax machines are catching on fire. Never had they gotten any more feedback. You know what happened 3 days after that? The bill that back then Senator McCain, President Bush, and the Democrats had secretly negotiated was never offered on the floor. 3 days later, it was killed because Rush Limbaugh and some other talk radios got wind of it. I'll elaborate later. That's my time.
Bill?
I get the feeling that this could go either way, but the thing that disturbs me about it is, to quote Nancy Pelosi, it's like, let's have a convention and then we'll find out what the hell it's all about. I don't see anybody here telling me this is exactly what we want to change and being very specific about it. And I think that as a Republican, I would have liked to see this go back to John McCain's solution of doing a contract with America, elect me and we'll do this. I mean, Newt Gingrich, not John McCain, sorry, Newt Gingrich.
You have a question?
The question is, what exactly do you want to change?
The call that's being made is to limit the power of the federal government. There are several key amendments that I believe will be proposed. One will be one for financial responsibility or balanced budget or financial responsibility. Maybe a cyclical balanced budget. There are times when you're going to have to do something like that. The next will be term limits. Why should somebody be able to be in Congress for 20 term or 22 years? Are they beholden to their constituents anymore? No. They've amassed campaign funds after every campaign. They come into the next race with already funds in the bank, and they're there. So do I believe that will be proposed? Absolutely believe it. There's been an organization since '95, and the Supreme Court overturned several states' laws that put limits on their congressional terms. The Supreme Court said you can't do that. That's the power of the federal government. So they overturned it, and a group sprung up called Term Limit Organization has been fighting to try to get term limits back and get it back in. They've joined the Convention of States movement, and they're now part of our organization. So we really believe we'll see that as one of the amendments. Other amendments will be a definition of what the Commerce Clause is.
Yeah.
You know, one time commerce was the freight you moved on a sea ship. I think they've kind of overinterpreted that one. You know, another will be term limits on the Supreme Court.
Yes.
Maybe the ability to recall a Supreme Court justice. So they're various. It's all about controlling the federal government. That's really what the call's about. It's a common call. It's been passed by 3 states now: Florida, Georgia, Alaska. It is the same bill that passed all 3 of those states. We believe it's going to be proposed in 28 more states this year. And so that's what the focus of the convention is. What keeps it there? Those amendments still need to be ratified. Once the convention proposes those amendments, and let's just say we come out with term limit balanced budget, it still has to be ratified. So there are a lot of safeguards in this process. And those are the safeguards. If we don't trust the American people, who are we going to trust?
We don't trust the Democrats.
Right here in the front.
Can I answer the term limits thing, or the what amendments part?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't get a response.
Go ahead.
The gentleman's question there.
Right.
Currently, we can recall federal judges. Article 3, Section 1, judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior. I don't want to amend, I want to defend. I don't have any amendments that I want to offer, but I'll tell you, Dr. Michael Ferris, one of the leaders of the Convention of States movement, is with a separate project that he's working at, a parental rights amendment, that many constitutional scholars state that there's one clause in there that it would actually give power to the government that they've never had over your children. And I apologize, I don't have the exact verbiage, but I can get it to you. It's something to the effect of, upon a proper, compelling reason, okay, judged by who, that they can then exercise control and do what they need to do. Was it the flu shot? Yeah, I don't know, whatever, but for your kids. I don't have children, but I have some nieces that I love, and I think that scares me to death, and my sister, who's apolitical, gets that. Back to the remainder of my time for the plan forward is to build a group that would be on email, text, various internet alerts. This is so inexpensive and so real and possible. It makes me cry that we don't do it. Where you can have thousands of concerned citizens. Because, you know, the beer's cold and Monday night TV's on, so we got to keep their involvement short. But if we make it easy for them, they do want to be patriots. Most people will step forward and do a task only when asked. So I'm going to ask them. And we're going to send up a bat signal, make a big laugh out of this thing, on important legislation. We're not going to abuse it. It'll be maybe every couple of weeks. We're not going to call all 535 representatives in the Beltway. We're going to focus on the people in the committee that are making the garbage that we want to object to. We're going to make their phones catch on fire. Because I'll tell you, any legislator or any candidate in here will tell you, they keep track of contacts from constituents. And when they see them rise on one particular issue in aberration to the other issues, they will listen and they will act. Whether it's to defend their job or represent their constituents, honestly, I don't care. As long as they follow the will of the people through the Constitution.
So right here in the front.
Hi, Rick Feinberg. I've had two concerns about any COS. One has been practical and one has been feasible. On the practical side, I don't see anything in Article 5 that limits the number of calls that can be made and how many amendments might be proposed. And that, to me, represents the risk of a runaway convention. And you can address that, each of you can address that. But as a practical matter, and this is what I raised to Mark Meckler when he spoke at my wife's conservative talk lunch in Reno, is, as a practical matter, if you can't impeach Obama, if you can't carry out your promise as our elected politicians in this republic to defund and repeal Obamacare, that you swore to your, quote, last dying breath you would do when we elected you in 2010, what kind of confidence can I have, or that can be instilled in me, that will permit me to believe that a convention of states could possibly, in time, achieve its objective, whatever the call may be?
It's a good question. You know, 50 years ago, this coming Tuesday, another made it great American who happened to be 53 years old at the time, October 27th, 1964, spoke these words: "It's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms intended for us by the Founding Fathers." He said, James Madison said, "We base all our experiments on the capacity of mankind for self-governance." So if you give up, then you're going to get more of the same that we've had. What's going to compel, is it a hard thing to do? Yeah, it's a hard thing to do. Should it be hard? Yeah, absolutely should be hard to amend the Constitution. But boy, it hasn't been hard for our courts lately to amend the Constitution. So if we're not willing to act, we're not willing to take charge of our own lives, well, it's going to be taken for you. And so that's my best approach to it. Do I wish Sean's movement would work? Absolutely wish that would work. There were millions of people that did that in 2010. There were millions of people in parks at rallies. There were many people part of the Tea Party organization, right or wrong, millions of them. They weren't uneducated. 60% of the Tea Party had college degrees and about 25% had advanced degrees. And they rallied and they burned up the lines in Washington, and the response was to turn the phone off. So that's a good movement, but I think it's time where we really rally as a country, where we go to the powers that were given to us in the Constitution. There's a reason it was put in Article 5. It's for this moment in time. Are we going to need Democrats to support this? Absolutely. You can't call a convention in 34 states without some support from Democrats. But you don't think they're worried? You don't think they're concerned about term limits? Absolutely are. 74% means we have a lot of across-the-board support. That's why I think it will work. I think the time has come where Americans are frustrated, where they don't trust Washington. 81% of Americans don't trust Washington. There's only one other time in this country when it got to that number. They didn't trust King George either. So we can mount a revolution by taking power from the Constitution we have and restoring that Constitution with the limitations that we need on it. That's why we think it'll work. I believe it'll work. That's why I'm involved with it.
Tim made a lot of my argument for me. I will add to it by saying this. One of the amendments that the left wants, and he's right, the left will have to participate, and in fact they are participating in the rules and negotiations with COS, and you know, we all know some good Democrats. I'm not going to slander them all. It's their movement and specific beliefs that I have an issue with, not any individual Democrats, except maybe Harry Reid. But the point is, one amendment that they're actively pursuing is to overturn Citizens United. Now, I will tell you that when I first saw that, I was like, that's interesting. I personally want all money out of politics. You got YouTube, you got email, and if it was fair and equal, we'd have a real campaign. The best man or woman would have to win. But the problem is, we turn off all the money, and the media is in their pocket, hook, line, and sinker, except for some talk radio. And all the surveys and polls tell you they'll have a huge advantage, and you don't need to know anything more other than Harry Reid loves the idea. That will come to the table as part of what's going on with that. I don't believe we should amend, I believe we should defend. It's not being followed now. Everything we need is in there. Any of your amendments are already in the enumerated powers. We just need to stop chasing this idea that will cause trouble and send it to the Supreme Court, which is something that we all agree is the one that has created this second, or as the COS people correctly use, shadow constitution. Well, why would we give it back to the same people that have been wronging us all this time? The rallies, people throwing trash in the reflecting pool in D.C. and all that, and you know, the kids defecating on the street in New York and the radical whatever. I'm not into rallies and all that. I'm into what works. And that's telephones, internet, databases, and activism. And remember, immigration's coming back, folks. We didn't kill the fire. We just knocked it down a few notches. We cannot give over our liberty. The Constitution is powerful, but it can only do so much. If we aren't willing to put the beer down for 3 minutes and make a phone call and talk to our friends, oh my God, I can't talk to my friends about politics. They won't want to come over for Thanksgiving. I respectfully would say you might want to take a look at that approach. This is our country. And it's only our country if we take it back. You only have the liberties that you exercise.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm Dave Nelson. Two things. One of the things that Sean just said, I think he defeated his own purpose. It keeps coming back. His solution, it will just keep coming back. Activism is great. It can get something done for a moment, but it doesn't last. We need some permanent solutions. As far as Article 5 goes, and who...
Do you have a question? Do you have a question?
Yes.
We're
Here's
not
the
going to
question.
debate from the floor.
Yes.
Do you have a question?
Yes.
Thank you.
The question is, since Article 5 already gave Congress the right to amend the Constitution, why would it give Congress another way of amending the Constitution?
Article 5 doesn't give it another way, except for the state. And it gives the state legislature the opportunity to amend the Constitution, to counteract what Congress has done, or what they've advocated. I don't think Congress is bad. I don't think people in Congress are bad. The House of Representatives did vote to defund Obamacare. Like they voted numerous times. Didn't make it to the Senate. One of the best reason for term limits is called Nancy Pelosi. Harry Reid's another good reason. Maxine Waters, Charlie Rangel. How about John McCain? How about some of the old, tired ideas that are there in Washington? What's wrong with having new ideas? What's wrong with giving hope to new people that they can run and have an impact on our country? That's why we believe it'll work. We believe the rally is that. It will work. It will cause lasting change, and that's what we're looking for. Will it last forever? We already answered that. And you may need to do this again in 50 years. But boy, I hope we make some changes, because if we wait, I think it's, is it 2033? Social Security gets declines by 25% trust fund. Let's see, I'm going to be, I'm not ready for the 20% wage cut, right? But I had a good business professor tell me, he said, Tim, remember, Social Security, it's like having a sundae. Make sure you put the ice cream, the nuts, and the and everything together. Social Security will be that cherry on top. So if it does disappear in your lifetime, it's really not that great to eat a cherry on a sundae. But let's make sure that our children, when we're putting this burden on, and actually we're not putting the burden on our children anymore. That burden's already been there. It's already there. They have a tough road to hoe. We're working on the grandchildren. We're putting a burden on the young people in this country that aren't born yet. It's time to stand up. It's time to take a stand and make a cause. As Ronald Reagan said, or his speech was coined in 1964, it's a time for choosing.
There's comments too.
I want to thank Dave for his question, and I believe I already answered it earlier, but I'll go back again. We cannot give over our liberty to the Constitution only. We cannot give it over to our legislators only. It has to be ours. We have to take ownership. Will there be problems that will come up again, that will need beat back again? Absolutely. That's the nature of humankind. People seek power. People continue to seek power. People that are beaten down continue to come back and seek power. I got some good news for Tim. He'll probably have his Social Security for quite a while, because I'll be paying for it. But the truth of the matter is, it's not stolen, it's not spent, it's all that stuff. I hear those things and I go nuts. It was under the law put in a trust fund to be invested with U.S. Treasuries. Is that a good or bad decision? We can debate that at another time. But what is going to happen is, at some point, it ain't just going to be Tim. It's going to be nobody. Because the Treasury is going to go and say, well, we need these bonds redeemed so we can do the whatever budget, and everybody's going to come up short. The economy may or may not crash. There's some things they can do to keep it from being super ugly. But it's going to be painful. The dollar's not going to mean what we grew up for the dollar to mean. The Constitution cannot fix that. We had Obamacare, to use Tim's wonderfully ugly recent example. they took that out of a bill that was passed in the House, because all bills that raise revenue must originate in the House, right? Stripped out the guts, kept the sausage casing, stuck their Senate sausage inside, called that originating in the House, and the Supreme Court said it originated in the House. Oh my gosh. And it's constitutional. If we amend the Constitution, that is not, I've shown you, is not necessary. What is going to prevent those men and women by human nature that continue and will continue to seek power from interpreting their version of Obamacare down the road, or their favorite law, and the Supreme Court saying, amen, good job, let's do some more of that. Liberty has to start with the people.
My question is for Tim, and you talk about a constitutional convention. Do you have a time frame for when that gets executed? Is it going to take 5 years, 10 years, 6 months, the rest of our lives?
Well, let's hope not, it doesn't take the rest of our lives, although I plan to be here for quite a long time. But the goal of this organization is to get it into the convention within the next 4 to 5 years. That's the goal. Do we hope we can do it sooner? Absolutely hope we can do it sooner. The momentum's there. The people are there. Iowa Republican Party just put it as one of their platforms. Down in the center of the country, just said, hey, it's safe enough. John has made a good case. Congress stripped the guts out of a bill, put in another bill, and the Supreme Court supported it. What's going to stop that from occurring tomorrow? What's going to stop that from occurring next year? What's going to stop that from occurring the year after? What's going to stop them from saying, Mr. Duvall, you make enough money, you don't need Social Security. Doesn't matter, you've been paying in since you were 16. Doesn't matter, we understand that, but hey, just think of how many good people you're going to help out. How many, we're going to spread your wealth around. So I wish that we could say, hey, this Constitution we have, the interpreted Constitution, the laws that have taken place, the rulings that have taken place, could protect us in the future. I don't believe that. I was a young businessman in Silicon Valley. Many of my friends started businesses on a weekend and in their garage. Can't do that today. Can't do it. Not only because the state of California is so crazy, but the EPA is more crazy. And where did the EPA get that power to make laws? Maybe it was from the United Nations. Maybe there's a UN treaty on carbon. Last time I looked, there's a power that says Senate must ratify a treaty. But we didn't ratify it, but it's sure been affected in the United States. That's why we believe we need this convention. That's why we need people to stand up and make this happen.
Time's up.
And maybe it won't happen. Sorry.
Well, Tim, I'm a little concerned because you just told us it's going to, I'm seeing some incontinuity here coming out of your group that bothers me because you guys want to lead the charge on this. You just told us 4 to 5 years till this happens. Mark Meckler's on the record in several videos online saying he wants this to happen in 2016, and he in fact articulated the fact that he wants it to happen during a presidential election year. So I respectfully, I think that they need to update the email list or something. You're not getting the updates, sir. Also, what bothers me is that when I was first asked to come to this meeting, I was humbled and flattered and was told I would be debating one of the local COS people, and I was like, okay, I'll have a fair shot, that's cool. Then I was called and told that Mark Meckler himself wanted to debate, and I didn't know how that came about. That's fine, if it was asked or whatever. But then I saw Mr. Meckler at another debate in Reno, and Jeannie introduced me to him, and he was very polite. And as he walked out the door, he said, I'll see you later in October for our debate in Carson City. 48 hours later, I got a phone call that he was not going to be debating me, which I thought was interesting. Then, a couple weeks ago, walking for another candidate up outside of Reno there, I talked to Jeannie again, our county COS representative in Douglas, and said, what happened to Mr. Meckler? And I give her credit for being blatantly honest. In front of 2 witnesses, she told me that Mr. Meckler has directed the national staff of the Convention of States is not to engage you at all. I'm a little retired master sergeant from the Air Force. How scary do I look? I have serious concerns about this gentleman and his group and their organizational skills, their approach. I pointed out their lack of facts in the history of the record, and they want to lead our Constitution into the operating room to perform surgery on it, and they claim that they will control the surgery. I could go on and on, but I won't. I have a serious ethical concern with that.
How about back here?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, right now, the political climate is sort of up in the air. We have a feeling that Republicans are gaining some traction because of the dissatisfaction with Barack Obama. And it seems like the Convention of States is building on that, this whole idea that the conservative movement itself is strong enough with the Tea Party element in it, that we could get a lot of Americans that are, at heart for the freedoms of America involved in this convention, and that's why the convention would turn out the way we would want, because we're going to have all these level-headed Americans who, okay, my question is, if it were not this way, what if on the polls that Fox News or whoever it is put up, it was 70% of Americans are now favoring those things the Democratic Party represents, rather than the way it looks now? Would the Convention of States people still be all eager to get a Convention of States put together? Are they not counting on this underlying sort of political fabric that, if it doesn't really exist, means that the convention will not accomplish at all what it means to accomplish?
First, let me apologize that you only got me here to speak. So I want to apologize to all of you. You got someone who's living in Nevada and decided to be a grassroots guy in this movement. So I'll apologize, Sean, that you didn't get one of the national guys. But quite frankly, this is Nevada. So we thought maybe it's better in Nevada if people pop out. Second, the polls we're talking about aren't Fox News. CNN polls by ORC International showed that 74% of Americans in July of 2011 wanted a balanced budget amendment. We're talking about the Carter News Network or the Clinton News Network or whatever other news network one's called these things. So these polls are not just coming out of conservative polling agencies. It's true that the Rasmussen organization did a poll. They said 67% of Americans believe that Washington is a self-interest group that only looks out after itself. I think they got that one right. So are we bouncing on the euphoria of a conservative movement? I hope we get conservatives involved. But there are a lot of other Americans, as I said before. This is not a liberal or conservative movement. This is an American citizen movement. There are a lot of Americans concerned about their country right now. They also don't believe they have a voice in that country. So this movement's bouncing on that aspect. You can have a voice. And when you talk about Article 5, most people don't know what it means. They don't even remember what it said. So they go back and read it and they go, oh my God, there is a remedy there. That's what we're bound. That's what we're hoping on. That's what we're moving forward on. Are we a growing organization? We've grown this week in Nevada. We've grown across the country. Our objective is to have 4,000 district captains across the country with 50 to 100 people in each of those districts. Our move in Nevada is similar. That's my task to help our Nevada organization accomplish that. It's all grassroots. It's all American citizens. That's how we're going to make the change.
To Ginger's question, the way some people see this happening is a package of amendments will come out of any convention. It will be 2 to 4 to 6. There'll be some stuff that we would really, maybe a lot of us would appreciate: term limits, balanced budget, with revenue enhancing restrictions. Watch the balanced budget. It's not what you think it is. It's the pick your pocket amendment, because they won't stop spending. And a lot of this is documented with George Soros and his groups. All they want to do is take the word militia, and they've stopped their insanity of scaring us and trying to repeal the Second Amendment, but they really haven't. They just want to move the word militia around, so there's no question of the commas or the grammar or anything anymore, that it strictly means the military and National Guard. You got to remember how this is going to go. It's not going to go the way you think it's going to go. You got the Federalist Papers where the big sales pitch to get the Constitution done. You think in the age of the internet and advertising and PMS, LSD, the news channel, and all this stuff, that they're not going to try to ram it down our throats?
Yeah.
For God's sakes, ladies and gentlemen, Rhode Island did not go to the Constitutional Convention. They were the last state to ratify it. But that thing was in effect, the Constitution, for almost 2 years, illegally, before they ratified it. So this reminds me when I was a kid and I got together with some friends in the neighborhood and formed a club, and we each put in 25 cents for a couple of weeks and agreed that it was something we'd all do fun together. And I went off to the Hostess Danish store and bought all the goodies I could eat, didn't tell anybody. My mom explained to me that that wasn't too cool. You made an agreement with these kids, and I had to pay those kids back double what I stole from them. When you make an agreement, when you're a state and you join a national alliance and you say that 13 states of 13 must ratify any changes, you darn sure better honor your agreement. Not say 9 have to honor it. What's going to come out of this thing? Some good stuff, some bad stuff, that'll all have to be litigated and decide what the law says before it's put into practice. I submit to you that it's all here now and in effect, and we need to stand up and put pressure on our elected leaders to follow it. Because if you got your friends at home with their feet up and the cold beer, and all they do is complain, but they don't go vote, they don't go walk, they don't put yard signs up, they don't make phone calls. I've talked to our congressman. Guy's very intelligent, he's receptive, gives you feedback. Our state legislators, I've talked to them, they're intelligent, caring people. If you don't get engaged with them, I'm not going to say you don't have a right to complain, because that's kind of human nature. But you kind of have to look yourself in the mirror and say, what is changing this document going to do? We do not have Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Ben Franklin. They don't exist anymore.
Carol has a burning question she needs to ask. I'll go to you next.
With you all supporting this or opposing it, my concern comes in that I'm not sure what you're supporting or opposing. We don't know how many delegates are going. We don't know who's going to elect them except for the people we don't trust already. And the fact that it could very well be Harry Reid. Where do you come down? Both sides. How do you support or oppose something that there's no written rules, and ask us to support you when we don't even understand what you're supporting, because there's nothing there to support?
I'll let you hit it first.
I'm not actually asking you to support me, I'm asking you to not support them. And you're right, Carolyn. My gosh, Mr. Nadelson, who's the lawyer that they claim supports all their decisions. And by the way, if you look at his footnotes in their legislative guide online, there's third wave, first wave, all these cute terms of how they want to package the legislation they want to follow. It doesn't mean a darn thing in history. It's a bunch of baloney. And look at some of the rulings, the Supreme Court rulings they cite. Read the rulings. On some of them, I've already found myself, just started earlier this week, it's not what they say. And Mr. Nadelson, I've never seen this ever from a professional. You know what a lot of his footnotes say? See Nadelson. Excuse me? When you breathe your own exhaust fumes? And by the way, no disrespect to the man, I haven't met him, but what college law professor does not get tenure? man did not get tenure from his colleagues. Now, I don't know why. I do not know why, but it is a fact he did not. Having said that, I think there's already an effective answer out there that I've covered, and I'll cover in a lot more detail. GuardTheConstitution.com is going to get pretty thorough with this type of thing, and we're going to get more information out to you. But where I come down against it, Carolyn, is that this organization, whose heart may be in the right place, and they've got some dedicated, extremely powerful and passionate volunteers. And I'm glad you're here, Tim, because if I had to debate Jeannie, I'd probably cry. But they're wrong. The laws, many of the key laws and precedents that they represent don't exist. And they don't mean what they say they mean. I don't know if they counted on some people actually reading their material. And like, I give Mr. Ferris credit, their attorney, their constitutional attorney. He said, we don't play with any of this stuff. We check the original sources. It's amazing what you can find on the National Archives. Photocopies of handwritten letters between delegates, court decisions and things. I did take his advice. I went to the original sources. And it doesn't mean, a lot of them, not all, a lot of them don't mean what they want them to mean. The Supreme Court's going to decide ultimately the structure of a convention if it's called.
I don't think there's any precedents that the Supreme Court will dictate the rules of convention. I wish that Sean could show me one case. It never ruled on what the rules of the convention are. Second, what do we have right now? You feel, what do we have right now? The Supreme Court can take anything we pass as an amendment and eventually change it. That's true. But they've already changed everything. They've already taken control. They've already went and politicized the bench. So we have a choice to make. Does all this seem like a great deal of trouble? If it is, then think about what's at stake. Do you think we want to sit by and watch it go as it's been going? Have you not been active? Everybody in this room has been politically active. You wouldn't be in this room today if you weren't politically active. Where did that get you? The way it's going to get you to where we want to go is to call collectively around this country. Take the people that are frustrated. Take the citizens of this country that want to change. Put them in a convention. Let them propose things. Let's see what comes out of that convention. It can't be a runaway convention. We're not in 1888 anymore. We're not in 1887 anymore. If it could be a runaway convention, Congress has already run away with it. The Supreme Court has already run away with it. Because they're in Washington. They make the rules. From outer space, the brightest city in the world today is Washington, D.C. They didn't hurt by the recession. But you got to look at who are the rule makers. There's an old saying we used to, when we were kids, the golden rule is those that have the gold make the rules. In this country, it's the people that have the gold that are going to make the rules. That's why we're so passionate about this movement. It's people that can make the change.
One more question. Jim?
I'm hearing, understand I'm not decided on either way on this thing. And I've told everyone I'm not going to decide until after the election because our main goal is to get Republicans elected, not this. But I'm hearing emotional arguments coming from this side of the room almost completely. I'm hearing emotional arguments coming from this side of the room some of the time. I'm more of a nuts and bolts guy, and before I go to the legislature, I want some answers. I see nothing in Article 5 that says who's going to pick the delegates. You guys keep saying, both of you keep saying the state's going to pick the delegates. Who in the state? Is it going to be the governor? Is it going to be the legislature? Is it going to be our senators in Washington? Is it going to be... Nothing in Article 5 has been set yet, and there is no precedent. So can you tell me, because before I go to the legislature and say, let's do this, I want to know how it's going to be handled.
Jim, what we'll do is there's a compendium put together. It has all the arguments in there, has all the rules that have gone on before us, all the compacts that have taken place, all the state conventions that have taken place. There is precedence on who's going to pick it. The general feeling is that the state will pick its delegates, that the either Assembly and Senate will pick how that will be done. So you might want to do it by a convention of counties, you might want to, it depends on what you want to do in the legislature. It's not dictated by Congress. Congress cannot make rules for this convention. It's going to be dictated by the state themselves, the legislature and the Senate, who's going to go to the convention. That's going to be up to you guys. Do we trust you? Believe me, I trust you more than I trust Washington, D.C. So, is it an emotional argument? There are emotional arguments, but also a lot of practical ones. I can give you all the practical information, and I will go ahead and email that to you. It's a legal document. I started reading it. I have insomnia, that cured part of that. So, do we make emotional arguments? Of course we do. We're passionate about what we do. I know Sean's passionate about what he wants. I've been on Sean's position. I've worked that way. I spent countless hours since 2009. I believe the way now to make effective change is get the states involved, get to the power that's in the Constitution.
Right before I get to Assemblyman Wheeler's question, I want to respond. Carolyn asked about precedent or something, and Tim said that my answer about the Supreme Court, there's no precedent. That's right. There's going to be litigation, and the Supreme Court will ultimately settle the suits. That's where the Supreme Court and the decision will be involved, because that's how litigation works in this country. And a matter of this import will end up in the Supreme Court. In Tim's other answer too, I had to write this down verbatim. I hope I got the quote right, Tim. I absolutely can't believe you said this. Quote, "Let's see what comes out of it." That sounds like Nancy Pelosi saying we have to pass the bill because you'll dig what's in it. Or I'm sorry, then you'll see what's in it. I don't think that's what you meant, but that's what you said, sir.
Well, Sean, Nancy Pelosi had a bill. She just didn't read it.
Well, and there's no precedent for us to read of how this will go, sir. To answer Assemblyman Wheeler's question, you said Congress cannot decide this. There's 41 bills that have been offered, a Congressional Research Service nonpartisan report. All that says Congress absolutely, under the necessary and proper clause, exercises the authority to define the convention. And like I said before, even if you feel I'm wrong, which I think you do, guess what? There goes 5 years of federal litigation, because the side that thinks the way I do, and the organizations that think, or I'm sorry, I think like them, they were in this longer than me. I need to pay them the proper respect. Patriot Coalition and groups like this, they're not going to lay down and say, okay, Congress called it and you know whatever, and you all are going to do what you want to do. They're not going to do that. Now, an important point that Assemblyman Wheeler asked, to history, there is a precedent. There are some governors. It would ultimately come to the governor, and he'd probably do a lot of deciding what he wants to do. There are some states that have actually had popular referendums to elect their delegates to ratification conventions. Or the governor could say, the legislature, we'll leave it up to them to pick them. We don't know. It will be a state authority that we know. That's very reasonable. We'll decide.
Sean and I agree on that one.
That will conclude our meeting for the evening. We are adjourned.